This segment of the show, it's called the Uncensored Debate. Well, the country's intelligence and other crime-fighting services have come under severe criticism in the wake of the recent rampant political crisis, some call it, that gripped the country. Many accuse them of being caught unawares, while others are calling for the heads of the political figures that are heading certain departments. Joining us now to discuss the ideal way for the crime fighters to protect the state, we're joined by Professor Anthony Turton. He is a former intelligence operative, Professor David Everett, a governance expert, and Yaki Silias. He is with the Institute for Security Studies, Board Chairperson there. And last but not least, Bob Mhlanga, a former senior intelligence officer. To all of you, gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you and a warm welcome. Well, we usually start this segment with one question that goes to everybody. And the question we are asking this afternoon is, what we saw in the past week, was it an insurrection or sporadic unrest? Let me start with you, Professor Turton.
Yes, good afternoon to you, the listeners. I think with the 2020 vision of hindsight, we can fairly confidently say that I think this was an attempt at insurrection. It's an internal dispute within the ANC about leadership and etc., but it's being conducted by non-constitutional means. So yes, I believe we have seen an insurrection, and it's by the way not the first one that has been launched by Mr. Jacob Zuma.
Professor Everett, do you hold the same view?
The same view in terms of, was this an insurrection, an attempted one? Yes. On the other issues, perhaps not.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And I like the short responses there, because we're going to get to the meat in just a moment. Let me come to you, Yaki Silias in Sweden. What are your thoughts? What we saw in the past week, insurrection or sporadic unrest?
I think it was clearly instigated. I'm not sure that the people that started the instigation knew where it was going to end up, but I think all the signs are there. And it also reflects the extent to which this rapidly escalated, I think, has been a surprise to everybody. And it reflects simply the challenges that the country faces. And it also reflects, I think, the need for deep and structural reform of the various security agencies across the board. There are challenges that face us. And given the high level of strain and tension within our society, we need to accept that ongoing protest, violence, instability is probably going to be with us for quite some time. So I think it's time to really look quite carefully at intelligence, the police, the military, criminal justice system, the efforts at capture by Zuma and his cohorts. So hopefully this is an appropriate wake-up call to look at the security agencies in a structured and considered manner.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, we're going to pause it there. Unfortunately, we can't get to Bob Mhlanga because his connection seemingly disappeared. We're going to try and see whether we are going to try and get him back. Before we go to a break, perhaps let's just go straight into it. Prof Turton, let me come to you. We talked to you in your capacity as a former intelligence operative, and you wrote an opinion piece recently basically trying to almost draw parallels with what you saw or what you were deployed to in your time as an intelligence officer in Eastern Europe. And you seek to draw parallels between what happened in South Africa in the past week and what you saw or experienced then. Talk to us about your experiences.
Yes, at that point in time, I was deployed into Eastern Europe, based out of Western Europe. The big pressing question after the Battle of the Lomba and the subsequent Battle of Quitaquanabal was the USSR was busy disintegrating. The Russians were no longer capable of projecting power. And the pressing intelligence question, the strategic question at the time was, would the Russians come to the assistance or to the support of the ANC-SACP alliance if there was a negotiated solution. So I was part of the team that established the CADESA process from the intelligence perspective, but I was also part of the team that was sent in to verify some of these things. So I found myself in Eastern Europe, particularly in Romania, where I saw some very, very interesting things, but also GDR, where in the GDR, Eric Honecker was swept from power through what we would call rolling mass action. And the important one, of course, was Nicolae Ceausescu, who was swept from power in Romania. And from that, I've drawn the simple conclusion that what we've seen in that period of time and what we've seen in this week in South Africa are two parallels, in my opinion. And then I'll describe that very simply as what happens when you get the rising tide of popular discontent colliding with the myth of the ubiquity of the state. So in this context, when Jacob Zuma was president, he spoke about the fact that the ANC would rule until the second coming. So there was that myth created, and we saw that swept away this last week. So the question that I then ask is, if you have this ubiquitous belief that, for example, the Iron Curtain can never come down. Well, I saw it fall before my very eyes, and we have the same thing now. Is the ANC-SACP alliance in power forever? Well, clearly we've seen that that is not necessarily so. So that's the parallel that I would draw from that period of time.
All right. Professor Everett, as I come to you, I'd like for us to have a listen to this soundbite of the Deputy Minister of State Security, Zizi Kodwa. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say before I pose my next question to you.
We live free of fear. If there are such allegations that there are former members working, of course, with some members of society who are part of this destabilization, we can't take that light. That's why we're investigating those allegations. That you can see the operation, the modus operandi, very sophisticated. This campaign is not sporadic. It is not spontaneous. There's somebody behind who's driving this operation. You must see the way it happens. You look at the modus operandi. It's some people who've got an experience of running operations. And it's that we are looking at the moment. Leave people who are looting and so on. Those will be arrested. Those will be stopped by the cadres who are here. But we want to look beyond that, including those who continue to instigate violence on social media. Some are celebrities who are not good role models. We condemn them because some of them are already on the wanted list, that they are committing crime by promoting violence in the manner they do.
Professor Everett, the key words I pick up from that soundbite from the Deputy Minister of State Security is that there was a modus operandi, and these were not sporadic, these were coordinated. If that is indeed the case, if that is what our law enforcement and in particular intelligence operatives saw and knew, why then did we see a week-long torching and looting of stores?
Well, I think part of the challenge is to understand that the state is fractured and the state is not monolithic and it doesn't act with only one set of interests. And I don't think the state and the ANC are the same thing. I think you have to separate them quite strongly. And there are clearly quite significant fights within the ANC, and there are also fights within the state. And so the fact that the Minister of Intelligence came on and told us halfway through the week that they'd foiled attacks on electrical substations came out of nowhere. We were all looking at looting and violence, and suddenly state security was saying, no, we've got people planted in there, we know what's going on. And the question is, well, why on earth did you keep it quiet? Why didn't you tell the police? Why was there no planning? Why are you suddenly able to appear at a press briefing and tell us, no, state security is on top of this, when self-evidently it isn't, and wasn't sharing information with the police. And this seemed to have taken everyone by surprise. So I think you're looking at part of state capture was the systematic hollowing out of the police, of any real prosecutorial capacity in the state, any investigative capacity in the state, for fairly obvious reasons. And I think we've reaped some of the whirlwind that they sowed.
Yakis Elias, if there was a leadership vacuum, should we still have the very same leaders at the helm of the key ministries that should have acted on this?
Well, clearly the ministers of intelligence, policing and defense have not performed adequately, would be a nice word to say. There have been, in the case of intelligence, I think part of the problem is that if state security is still provided these reports, I don't think anybody believes them. You only have to read the Mufamadi panel to realize that the entire intelligence system is broken. It is fractured. It is funded and was used to facilitate Jacob Zuma's resistance against the Ramaphosa government. What we need is an entire reconfiguration of the intelligence structure. So I think that there are really many challenges. So that with regard to intelligence. Policing, ongoing challenge. Our analysis at the Institute would indicate that in 75% of the instances where violence occurred, these are repeat areas where violence generally occurs and has occurred for more than a decade. So it's no surprise. It's basic. It's not intelligence. It's basic analysis, trend analysis. Yet it happened and it caught us by surprise. And so we can look across the entire security architecture in South Africa. And I say again, we're going to be facing with ongoing challenges in the years ahead. And we really need to start looking seriously at rebuilding the capacity of the state in line with the actual functions that it has to prepare, and not mythical functions of either the BRICS or conventional defense or whatever the case may be. So I really hope this is a wake-up call that the president will not only give sufficient attention on the economic area and corruption, which is important, but also on taking control and providing direction on the security agencies. Without them, we are blind.
Sure. Gentlemen, let me ask that we pause there for a moment. When we return, I'm going to ask, what then should South Africans make of the instigators, the so-called instigators? The Minister of Police says 3 more have been arrested. That tells us that 4 people out of 12 are now arrested. Is this a way forward? Are they really making good on what they have promised the nation, that those behind this will be arrested? Or could it be a way to deflect attention from their failures? We ask that question when we return. This is Politics Unscripted. Good afternoon to you if you're just joining us. We are in conversation with a number of panelists. They are experts in the field of intelligence and security. Professor Turton, let me turn the attention to you now. So far, we have about 4 people who have been arrested, and they have been labeled as instigators. Are we being hard on the authorities when we say they simply were caught napping, but they are now back in full swing and they are making the necessary arrests?
Well, I think, the good news is that ultimately there have been some arrests made. And, the beautiful thing about this whole situation is that the use of social media to sow discord and to mobilize grassroots, we've seen it, in the Arab Spring, for example, just how rapid these things can be deployed. However, the upside of that is it leaves a forensic trail. And that forensic trail, provided you have the forensic investigative capability, of course, now you've just got to pick up all the bits and pieces. And ultimately, it's not a question of the government just trying to deflect. Obviously, they would try to deflect. I mean, that's a logical thing to try and say, well, we're on top of it, don't worry about it, we're under control. However, whatever that deflection may or may not be, ultimately it has to end up in a court of law. And to me, this is the golden thing that's come out of the last week. What the last week has done for us, as far as I'm concerned, is really 3 things. It has forced the purging of the ANC, of its criminal heart, if you like. Okay. So secondly, it has now forced the concept of the rule of law to come to the fore. So we are now talking about the rule of law as a national discourse. But the third thing that it's done is that it has deracialized the debate. It has basically factored race out of the national conversation, Because what it is now about is about where does each individual entity, whether you're an organization, whether you're a grouping, whether you're an individual, where do you stand vis-a-vis the rule of law? So ultimately, I see this actually as an invigorating thing. And in fact, I'm very upbeat about what this is ultimately going to result, because I believe it's going to result in a rejuvenated civil society. And it's going to ultimately deepen our democracy, because we've been through a stress test, and that old cleavage line of race that they tried to oil, that they tried to lubricate, has failed. That didn't work. So ultimately, I think we've actually come out a lot stronger.
I like that word, stress test, or that phrase, stress test. Professor, there is the view that, in fact, it's held by Yaki Siliers. I'm not coming to you yet, Yaki. I'm still on Professor Everett. That you hold the view that this week's riots were a dress rehearsal if former President Jacob Zuma were to be jailed again, perhaps as a result of the ongoing legal processes that he faces. I want to ask you the question, how does insurrection manifest itself?
I think it can come around in each society will have its own lines of fracture, and I think what matters is how you rattle the cage in order to destabilize that society. I think, as Anthony has said, race is an obvious one in South Africa. Inequality is another one. Ethnicity is another one. Going for foreigners, xenophobia is another one. So you can use all sorts of tricks of the trade to try and destabilize the society. And if you have a destabilized society and you simultaneously attack key strategic points, cell phone towers were being attacked, water reservoirs, municipal electricity substations. These are not the acts of poor, starving people. These are the acts of people who are deliberately trying to bring the society to a point of instability such that we would all say, this government can't handle it. We need someone who is going to bring peace. And the Zuma faction was hoping that would happen, and everyone would say yes, and it's got to be former President Zuma who will do that. And unfortunately for that faction, I think that kind of idea lasted about a day, maybe 2 days. And as soon as people began to ask the question, why did this happen, followed by who did it, your question about instigators, I think they began to realize quite quickly that lots of genuinely hungry and starving people may well go and loot somewhere if you point them at it and you say, go there and we will make sure there are no consequences. And that's what any number of the looters have been telling police, journalists, and so on. And so I think you have to begin to take away the noise, if you like, and begin to look at what Pravin Gordhan said about state capture, join the dots. Make sure that you're joining the right dots. But I think there's a very clear narrative in here. It has nothing to do with riots and that kind of inflammatory language. I think there was a deliberate attempt to try and create an insurrection which would topple the Ramaphosa government, preferably topple constitutional democracy, and allow a gang of people who have formerly enjoyed the 50 billion rands worth of the largesse of the state to continue doing so.
One of the people whose name was bandied about, I'm coming to you now, Yaki Siliers, one of the people that were, whose name was sort of out there, whether it be through media reports and, as he suggested, through his media statement that it was the Deputy Minister of State Security, Zizigodwa, who actually made mention of his name, and in a very angry response in a statement pushing back. It was Tulane Islam, the former intelligence operative. I have a soundbite of him which was recorded on Friday as he attempted to hand himself over to the police. Let's just have a listen.
To build a nation that is united, irregardless of color, race, or creed. That is what I stood up for more than 36 years. But now I'm not putting the ANC hat. I had a privilege to serve this country as the ambassador in Japan, strengthening relations, political and economic and social relations with Japan. I have matured through my international experience. So this must be very clear. We must not politicize the situation. Let us reflect precisely to the root cause of the challenges facing our people.
Yakisilias, there is a person who has been accused of being one of the instigators. He says that let's not politicize the situation. By the way, I don't believe that he has been arrested, although he went to the police station in Durban to hand himself over, and I guess he was given the cold shoulder, so to speak. What do you make of his statement?
I don't think any of us really know what the actual facts are. We are all speculating, and we are responding to remarks by the Deputy Minister of Intelligence. We need to wait for the appropriate processes to unfold. So I think we're in a bit of a dangerous territory, I think, in terms of the speculation, who did what. We are all responding to what government is saying, and we are also looking at the trends of how things evolved. And our analysis, well, certainly from the Institute for Security Studies, followed from the way in which events evolved, the blockage of the N3 and how things then evolved in the actions. And that made us say, but there is something more behind this than simply hungry, desperate, angry people. And I think that we all wait for evidence to come. I can't comment on the individual concerned. I don't know him.
Nor can I comment on him, because I frankly don't know him either. But what I know is that he started quoting lots of scripture on that Friday night.
Well, you would, wouldn't he? I mean, these guys will all now profess their innocence, and you know, I mean, you have the family of Jacob Zuma helping to clean up when they clearly helped to instigate, and all of this kind of stuff. That's all, you know, for the media. That's not real stuff. We need to get the evidence that Anthony Turton was speaking about previously. And we need to reconstitute our security agencies that they are able effectively to respond, and that we and others within government will believe what they say. Because quite frankly, nobody can believe anything that comes out of state security.
Sure. If that is the case, that is a serious indictment. If the state security cannot be believed. I mean, you've just described what you saying they term intelligence, and you describe it as just a trends analysis. It's what is happening anyway. Let's come to you, Professor Turton. And if there is indeed a leadership vacuum, particularly in our security forces, where do we need to start in order to reform and make sure that the right people are in the correct positions?
Yes, okay, I'll answer that question, but can I just please add one thing to what my good colleague Yaki Salia said there. In terms of trends analysis, you know, I live in an area called Ugu, the Ugu district municipality of KZN. And what's been happening in Ugu now for at least 2 years maybe has been the systematic targeted attacks of water infrastructure. I'm now primarily a water specialist. So we've seen literally like a certain valve taken out or a certain pump taken out with military special forces precision. And this has been designed with minimal effort to cause maximum damage. And I've been calling this for probably a year or so now, calling this, saying that there's something working in the background. It is organized. It is systematic. This is not just ordinary labor relations thing. So let's just get back to answering your question now. I've just published a piece in a state security journal called Nongai. And in that, I've drawn parallels between the current SSA and the old boss under BJ Foster and the State Security Agency under the current present regime. And what's significant about it is both of them suffered a major crisis of conscience. Both of them were state security in focus. In other words, they were there to prop up an unpopular and embattled president or leadership. That's important. And ultimately, none of them were tenable. None of them could stand. But whereas Boss collapsed because they misappropriated the princely sum of 30 million South African rand at that point in time. The SSA, according to Zondo, has misappropriated something in the order of R1 billion. So this is on steroids. So I would draw a parallel there because I'm a parallel kind of guy, and I would say that what happened to Boss and what happened to the government of the day then is going to happen now.
Yes.
It's simply untenable. You know, you have to have an intelligence structure that serves the interest of the society. Mm-hmm. And in fact, as a founding member of the Secret Service, I was involved in the amalgamation and the creation of the first democratic reporting structures, if you like, you know, within the intelligence dispensation. So I know for a fact that our laws are, in fact, profoundly democratic, subject to oversight. So we need to go back to that where you've got credible leadership that can be trusted, and it has to serve impartially. And if you've got time later on, I can talk about the experiences that we had when we amalgamated statutory and non-statutory forces, because I was in that so-called super working group of amalgamation. So at that period of time already, we could see the different cultures from the statutories and non-statutories were profoundly different to one another. And of course, ultimately, that made for the inevitability of not working. And in fact, at that point in time, the big question that we asked ourselves was is the ANC capable of morphing itself from a liberation movement into a party of government? Mm-hmm. At that point in time, they were not separating a party from state, and there are a whole lot of reasons around that. And we hoped at that point in time that the complexity of managing a sophisticated industrialized economy would force them to become a party of government. We now look back with hindsight and we can say we failed. You know, they didn't transform themselves. In fact, if anything, they captured the state rather than have the state transform them. So we're going back now to that fundamental question. We're in the remnants of a sophisticated manufacturing export-related economy. We need to have stability. We need to have a credible intelligence service. There's an honourable role to play for intelligence officers and intelligence operations, but they've got to serve the interests of the Constitution and the interest of the society, not the narrow interests of party political processes. And that is all built into our national laws at this point in time. So we don't really need legal reform. We just need to actually have a purging of this concept of the deployment of cadres that are loyal to party over the loyal individuals. And in that, one more parallel, the parallel with the Donald Trump United States of America. You see an absolute parallel there, where you're loyal to the king, or you're out. Okay, it's one of those things.
All right. Well, gentlemen, let's pause there for a moment, because there's some nuggets there that Professor Turton has pointed to. When we return, how in the world do we build a credible leadership that can be trusted, as Professor Turton says, when there are those who are saying there's a faction within the ANC, the governing ANC, whose mission is to embark on violence? How do you marry these two? But we'll have that conversation in a moment. You're watching Politics Unscripted. We are in conversation about the state of our security in the country. Professor, let me come to you, Professor Everett, and Last week, Tuesday, the Minister of State Security, Ayanda Dlodlo, paid credence to claims that there are former intelligence operatives alongside ANC politicians who are aligned to former President Jacob Zuma, who may have instigated this. I think you remember that press conference by the security cluster. If the minister could say, yes, indeed, we've heard of these claims and we are investigating, where do we start in building or in having this credible leadership that Professor Turton speaks about that can be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think we have to see it in context, and that is for the last since 2019, Ramaphosa has been trying to rebuild every part of the state, which would include the state security agency, the police, and so on. Clearly, the justice cluster is working. Otherwise, Jacob Zuma wouldn't be in prison and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I don't see this as a kind of all doom and gloom and everything has fallen apart and we're all on the brink of disaster. I think there's been some really robust work done in some sectors and not in others. And the most difficult is the most secretive. It's this world. And I'm not a securocrat or an intelligence anything, but I am aware of some of the tendencies that are evident in that agency. And it wouldn't be surprising when the divisions within the ruling party are so deep and where the risk for those who are going to be caught and hopefully convicted of state capture, let alone the recent violence, where those pincers are now coming in to really bite people. They are running scared. And that, for me, says part of the state is working. Part of the state still needs to be rebuilt and refashioned. And yes, we have to recreate it and get a credible leadership. But I don't think it means that, therefore, the state is either incompetent entirely or that everyone needs to be rebuilt. I think it's been a very strategic move. And I think this happened because events overtook the ability of Ramaphosa and his allies to begin to actually deal with the state security apparatus. But certainly the justice cluster is the reason we're here, and it's the reason that former President Zuma is sitting in prison as we speak.
Yaki Seleas, you have the difficult job of analyzing for us then, if indeed President Ramaphosa and the cohort of leadership that are leading with him right now, if there are genuine attempts at trying to rebuild. The worry, though, is that next year there is a leadership contest within the ANC. And who might come out of that, we don't know. What happens if the faction, which is hell-bent on wreaking havoc in the country, wins? Are we back to square one?
Yeah, I just don't think that that's a viable option. President Ramaphosa is by far the most popular politician in South Africa and within the ANC. And he will, unless something happens to him personally, I'm quite convinced he will emerge as the ongoing president of the ANC and very likely of the country. I think that what has happened is that the troubles within the ANC, the factions within the ANC, as David Everatt has expressed, has become a national problem. And South Africa is now confronted with these deep-seated problems. Ahead of that, in the next few months, I hope that President Ramaphosa will do what P.W. Botha did when he hauled an obscure professor from the University of the Orange Free State, Neil Barnard, and told him, please re-establish credible intelligence working from the Bureau of State Security. And he created what eventually became the National Intelligence Agency, which was a credible agency at the time that South Africa transitioned to apartheid. And I think that's the kind of intervention that is required within intelligence. Within the police, lots of work lies ahead. The police cannot even do basic trend analysis, and they are entirely reactive. And then the challenges within the South African National Defence Force was also laying bare. We have a military completely unsuited to the real challenges that face South Africa, the real tasks. These three departments, while, as David said, the justice cluster is more or less operating and on his road. Those three departments and the coordination between them needs serious work. But in my view, that has to start, because the one thing that Jacob Zuma knew was, and what he invested in, was to control the security establishment, because that's his power base. And Ramaphosa needs to pay attention to the security base, because as I said previously, we're going to remain turbulent and unstable and violent and all these kind of things for a number of years. If we just look at the trends on unemployment, inequality, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Professor Turton, perhaps you may possibly have the last word. If President Ramaphosa is to pay attention to the security and in particular the intelligence structures, does he do that to the neglect of other important elements as he rebuilds? How much attention does he pay, particularly to the intelligence structures?
Well, I think I'll agree with Professor Everett. The state is not monolithic. There are parts of the state that are functioning very well. In fact, there are even parts of the police force that are functioning well, and one of them is a special task force. And also within the SANDF, there's parts of special forces that are still functioning well. They acquitted themselves reasonably well at the Battle of Bangui, So we do still have capacity. What's happened is they've been constrained. So I see those constraints possibly being lifted now simply out of a national urgency. And I think we're probably going to move into a new situation that I would like to promote is this idea of a central debate about the rule of law. Because if the rule of law is the fundamental focal point of everything that we're doing,
yes,
that now becomes the retention or the return back to our democratic roots and to our constitutional roots. So the question then is what leader is, where do they stand vis-a-vis the rule of law? And ultimately, therefore, I see this as being a part of a democratic transition. Remember, democracies don't happen in the click of a finger. We've come from 350 years of turbulent history. So democracy is an evolutionary process. It's happened like that in the United States of America and elsewhere. So democracies, we are actually on the way to becoming a more robust, more stable democracy. And I would urge against too rapid a transition and too rapid a purging of existing leaders, because that's going to create instability on its own. So I would say that this is going to play itself out in the very, very short-term future. As it plays itself out, you're going to start seeing credible evidence coming to light. That credible evidence is likely to lead to prosecutions, which, of course, now that's going to pose another question within the ANC about the rule of law. Where do they stop? Where do they stop? Because everyone's had their hand in the till at some point in time. So there's going to become some kind of conversation about, well, how deep do we dig? Because everyone's been doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Okay, but I think we're going to emerge invigorated, and in all probability we're going to maybe have that sort of the igniting of that South African spirit. We've pushed ourselves to the brink on many occasions. We've never gone over the edge. We've always pulled back.
Yeah.
And in each case, we've always pulled back stronger and invigorated. And to me, the big invigoration now is this week has deracialized South African politics. So I wrote one piece where I spoke about this is the hidden immunity idol that has now been found. And this is the fundamental game changer in the game of survivor.
I see David Everett laughing there. David, very, very briefly, I don't have time, but if President Ramaphosa is to steady this ship, you heard Anthony Turton saying he can't purge leaders, particularly those who are for this unrest. So does that mean that he presses the pause button on a cabinet reshuffle?
No. I mean, I think, I think part of cabinet reshuffling is also living up to his promise of cutting the fat off the state. I think when he got elected, we were hoping cabinet would be half the size that it is, and the deputy ministers, most of whom we don't know what they do other than drive around in big cars, would disappear. And I think the problem he has, and that we haven't mentioned, but there's an election coming up in October. And so on top of a pandemic and a lockdown comes this attempted insurrection, mass looting, and obviously a massive shock to the economy. And then he's got an election which the ANC got thoroughly trounced at in 2016 in the local sphere coming up in October. And so I think if we're expecting the president to do dramatic party political purging. It's just not going to happen. Maybe after he wins, if he wins, but after the election, he's got more space to maneuver. But you do not start purging people a couple of months before you're going to go onto the hustings and ask everyone to vote for you, unless they are most obviously guilty of something, and those people will hopefully be in prison, as one of them is already. But I really think he's got a very, very small space to maneuver in, and he needs to make the most of it. But I don't think changing, purging the police or intelligence, I don't think that's going to happen immediately. It does clearly need to happen. I mean, I'm listening to two colleagues who are experts in this, not me. But I do think the election is looming larger and larger in the minds of politicians, if not the rest of us. And given the clap that the ANC got in 2016 in Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela Bay, etc., I think they're watching this election very nervously.
Sure. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation in this important debate. I won't name you because I'm completely out of time, but thanks indeed for your wise counsel.